Okay. I'm going to give you time to wrap up your biblical philosophy material. But before we do that, okay, I want to have this conversation. Okay. So you should take some notes on it as we discuss. Okay.
Good question.
How many links do we get to?
Okay.
The world may never know.
Can we be objective?
No.
Yes.
Define objective. We're learning what that and not makes me get. And
Objective. I've heard of the bias.
issues.
I'm learning about
Objective
that.
is like-
Let's take it this way. Objective. Can you have an unbiased
No.
take on anything or an unbiased worldview?
No.
Okay. So having a worldview automatically predisposes you to certain assumptions and creates a kind of bias. Fundamental beliefs about the world, about whether or not God is and what God is, automatically begin to shape what you think about everything else. Okay. If that's the case, what are we to do with that bias? Okay.
And make it known before you state an opinion.
Okay.
You already know about it so that when we think about something, we're like, okay, I'm biased towards this. That being said.
Okay.
You at least recognize it and know how you can
Okay.
observe that.
Okay. So acknowledging and recognizing that the bias is there leads us to a place that is sort of intellectually honest about whatever the topic we happen to be discussing is. Yes? Okay. Follow on to that. How then do you understand something in a full sense if you start with a preloaded set of assumptions? Hang on, go ahead.
You find someone else who's biased in a different way you are, and you think, okay, let me try to look at it in their perspective.
Okay. You start, and you don't even necessarily need another individual, but it's helpful to hear it from another individual. You start by back tracing to your assumptions and then assume the opposite and follow the line of logic where it leads. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you know that your default program is to start with an assumption that God exists and move from God exists into something else, then in order to get a fuller picture of any sequence of logic or rationale on a given topic, like the origin of the universe, you start with the opposite assumption and then reevaluate the evidence and see where you end up. Right? That's a way to play that out. To make it more effective, you listen to somebody else who does it. And herein lies the challenge. Because when we hear opinion, or when we hear analysis or philosophy and theology that starts with a bias opposite our own, our initial response is to respond, to argue against it, to figure out ways to discredit it. And what you do when you do that is you stop understanding the opposite viewpoint. Because you're not listening anymore. Listening requires us to consider what is being said and how it might change the way we process the same idea or topic. But if you're not willing to listen, then you don't really understand. Does that make sense? I'm not saying you have to end up drawing the same sets of conclusions, but what I am going to do as we walk through the philosophy and the theology we're going to start in on next week is not present it from your biblical worldview. I'm going to present it with the base assumptions of the philosopher at play. So when we talk about Mesopotamian religion and how the Mesopotamians understand what is going on in the world theologically and philosophically, I'm not going to start with a framework that is the biblical one. I'm going to present it to you from the worldview of the Mesopotamians. This is how they understood the world. Your task is to listen to that. And after listening to it, entertain the dialogue between the worldview you hear and the one you know, grounded in Christian faith and in the scripture. And when we do the Greeks, I'm not going to present it from a biblical perspective. I'm going to present it from Socrates or Plato's or Aristotle's perspective. And you're going to hear their underlying assumptions, their fundamental and foundational sets of beliefs. Because what I want you to do is understand where they're coming from and how they get from where they start to where they conclude, and why it makes sense to them. It probably won't make sense to you. That's okay. And for some of it, it shouldn't, because it's opposite a biblical worldview. For some of it, you're going to hear things in Plato's non-biblical worldview that sound a lot like 21st century Christian West's worldview, and that may not be a good thing. Because post-Enlightenment Christianity is steeped in Enlightenment thought and Platonic ideologies that have lasted and reshaped what the biblical narrative presents us. And so when you hear something familiar in Plato, we're going to have to talk about why it's familiar, and is it okay that it's familiar? Is this genuinely a biblical concept, or is there something amiss with the way we understand what the Bible is doing? And in those moments, I'm going to poke holes. And I'm going to press on things in your worldview that are foundational or that are significant. I'm not trying to offend you, but I want you to think about it and be challenged by it and process it out. Because we can't necessarily be objective, but we can consider what is not our own worldview, perspective, and foundational assumptions about the world. Does that make sense? This class is going to press you to know why you think the way you think, and to be able to see through pieces of worldview that get you back to someone else's worldview. The goal when you leave this class is that when you hear somebody in the public square, or you hear somebody at a college, or you hear somebody in the world around you articulate something that is a non-biblical worldview, you can identify it. You know where it comes from, and you know where it's going to lead. And you know why you think there are fundamental flaws with that line of reasoning, and where that worldview has serious flaws or problems according to a set of Christian convictions and the texts of Scripture. Is that making sense? But to do that, I'm going to throw you into the deep end, and I'm going to just give it to you from that worldview. And then you're going to end up swimming in the soup trying to sort out what works and what doesn't. Okay? Making sense. Question, concern, or freak out? Welcome to the party. Okay. We start in on that sort of properly next week. Tuesday. You are working on your biblical philosophy material. Okay. It needs to be up on the wiki by Monday night at 11:59, or it will be late. Okay. Midnight would be Tuesday morning, so yeah, that's late.
Are you going to be checking it out Tuesday morning?
Is time stamped.
Oh.
Oh.
Is this new news for you?
I'm no dum-dum. Okay. You're working. Tuesday, we roll into some new things, okay?
Tuesday.
Go.
Why are there a chalk thing that was up on the side?
Took it down.
Why? It was so fun.
You like that chalk thing.
Like notes.